It all kicks off in some cozy, snowed-in tavern where the local gossip is spicier than the mulled wine. All centered on some battlefield maniac. Apparently, this ghost of a warrior pulls a disappearing act after every fight, only to pop up again when the next big brawl starts. And the real head-scratcher was how a sellsword, a guy who supposedly has nothing to live for, keeps cheating death like it's his job. He's become the stuff of legends. You know, like some tragic hero from a storybook, fighting with a chip on his shoulder, the size of a mountain. The juiciest theory. He's a dethroned prince on a ridiculously emo quest to find a dramatic exit. Cut to our leading man, Yuri, the third prince of Betrayal and professional heartthrob, who's currently being cornered by some guy. The dude's monologue is all doom and gloom about self-destruction being the only way out. Cue the flashback harp music. We're zipping back 10 years to a swanky casino where a younger Yuri is living it up. He was having the time of his life, watching some poor sucker from a neighboring kingdom about to take the royal mage, Hernando, to the cleaners. But here's the thing, Hernando was absolutely losing his mind over how Yuri somehow always wins. And he wasn't the only one with his jaw on the floor. Yuri, cool as a cucumber, just shrugs it off as Lady Luck having a crush on him. Not some cheap trick. Before getting to his feet, he then cheekily suggests another round, offering to double the pot. Right before Hernando, the designated dad of the group, reminds him they're going to be late. This, of course, sends the other gamblers into a tizzy, convinced they're being scammed out of their cash by some royal card shark, so they start getting loud. And Yuri, whose ego is easily bruised, puffs up his chest and hits them with the classic, "Do you have any idea who I am?" But they weren't backing down, grumbling that all royals are just a bunch of useless, spoiled brats anyway. Hearing his entire class get dragged, Yuri dramatically flings the cards into the air and announces, "That's the third prince of Betrayal to you, peasants." He then declared they were about to pay a hefty price for their big mouths. And you could hear a pin drop as he unleashed a swift and brutally over-the-top response. And just like that, he completely wiped the floor with them. Later that night, a slightly disheveled Yuri meets Akaterina, blaming his tardiness on dear old dad. He practically begs for forgiveness. But Akaterina isn't having it, reminding him she had to pull some serious ninja moves just to sneak out for their date. Trying to win her back, Yuri starts spilling some top-secret family drama about his father's passing. He even adds a dramatic, "I'm not supposed to be telling you this," prompting her to wonder why he'd bother if he clearly didn't trust her. "Then why?" she demanded. "Did you give me this super meaningful pendant?" And with that, she chucked it, leaving him standing there like a fool. Her parting shot was a crisp, "Don't contact me again." Yuri was just left frozen, completely clueless about how he'd messed up so badly this time. He had a sinking feeling that fixing this particular disaster was going to be a nightmare. And, of course, some creeper was watching the whole soap opera from the shadows. After that night, the fragile truce between Betrayal and the Empire basically shattered, and the two nations went from a cold war to an all-out brawl. The entire kingdom of Betrayal was overrun and practically set on fire, with everyone running for their lives. It was, to put it mildly, the day the world went crazy. Years dragged on. The body count climbed, and the whole messy war just refused to end. Meanwhile, Pipawara was still fighting like hell to keep Yuri safe. But the tide was turning, and it all seemed to suspiciously revolve around one key person being M.I.A. Yuri initially blew it off as just bad luck. Because, let's be real, who wants to confront that kind of ugly truth? But eventually, the light bulb finally went off, and he realized Irina's backstabbing was the linchpin for this entire catastrophe. The timing was just too perfect. His father was conveniently out of town right when the Empire decided it was the perfect time to invade. Coincidence? He thought not. Yuri tried to brush off his growing case of main character syndrome. But then a letter arrived that basically said, "My bad for everything." His mind flashed back to him standing dramatically before his burning castle, as uninvited guests closed in for the kill. He took out a few. But then the party crashers just kept on coming. He knew he was probably toast. He took a nasty hit, and just as some goon was about to deliver the final blow, Lauren swooped in. taking the hit like a hero in a romance novel. Lawrence gasped. Run. You magnificent fool. If you want to live as other soldiers formed a dramatic huddle, they all swore that if Yuri kicked the bucket, their future was officially cancelled. So Yuri booked it. With the angry mob hot on his designer heels, he dove into a musty warehouse, still trying to finish his master plan, thinking he had to bust out of this encirclement and survive to plan his epic comeback tour. On top of all that, he couldn't stop worrying about his dad. Just then, some guy wandered over to him, Yuri, hitting a new level of melodrama. Begged him, "Save me, I'm sorry for everything. Even that thing I did last Tuesday." The man told him the Empire was about to get a massive karmic bill and that their backup was on the way, which is why Yuri needed to scram. Yuri, desperate to survive, clung to that hope like his favorite blanket. But spoiler alert, everyone died anyway. He couldn't even remember what the whole point was, so all he could do was swing his sword around in a futile attempt at self-punishment. He even got the paranoid feeling that someone was about to pop out and get him. Then, record scratch. The scene changed. Yuri was just chilling outside when a dude in a full suit of armor clanked to a stop right in front of him. He started in with, "You know, in the end, you were still a selfish brat," adding, "Frankly, a dirt nap would suit you." Then he called Yuri by his name. Yuri was shook. Everyone who knew his embarrassing backstory was supposed to be 6 feet under. The guy popped off his helmet for the big reveal. It was Lawrence. But wait, Lawrence had totally died right in front of him. So, what was this? Some kind of ghost with unfinished romantic business. Lawrence launched into a tirade, blaming Yuri's cheap tricks for ruining Betrayal and shattering his entire world. His new life mission was to end Yuri. Yuri, however, was just thinking to himself, "I always figured dying would feel like a weight off my shoulders." But the curse of guilt was still clinging to him like cheap cologne. The blood of Betrayal never abandons its honor, even if it means a dramatic death. And with that theatrical thought, Yuri's eyes snapped open. He found himself back in his childhood bedroom, looking like a preteen again. His father casually mentioned he'd been out cold for the last 3 days. Yuri was floored, since he was pretty sure his dad had already bought the farm. Utterly confused, he grabbed his father's hand like it was a holy relic. He was thinking, what in the time-traveling heck is happening? His father, who always preached about honor, had secretly been a legendary party animal. His dad gave him a little slap and told him to quit talking nonsense. When Yuri looked outside, everything was suspiciously fine. The castle looked totally normal. His 2 brothers were there, too, just hanging out. In a move worthy of a daytime drama, Yuri fainted from the sheer disbelief of it all. At first, he figured it had to be a super weird dream. But then it clicked. He had somehow actually traveled back to the past. He was back to the spring of his 13th year. It was a total do-over. The next morning, Ina, Yuri's maid, came in to tell him it was time for sword practice. Startled, Yuri shot out of bed like a rocket, asking for his clothes. Ready to go. He didn't have time to waste on boring things like washing up. Ina calmed him down, insisting that she had to wash his face first. As she did, Yuri was hit with the memory of her death in the future, which was a total buzzkill. That memory was a real downer. So he did the logical thing and ordered her to slap him 3 times. A shocked Ina hesitated, completely bewildered, but he insisted. "Hey, it's not treason if I'm the one who orders it." She nervously asked if he was serious, and he replied dramatically, "I always keep my promises." After getting his face smacked, Yuri headed to sword practice, his cheeks still stinging. Man, that slap had been way harder than he'd expected. And yet, not a single soul offered a word of sympathy. Not even Bernard, his sword guru, who couldn't be bothered to ask if his face still worked. Bernard was also giving his usual nitpicking a day off, which was about as rare as a sunny day in winter. Yuri vaguely remembered overhearing Bernard telling his dad that he was becoming more diligent and would be a true asset to Betrayal. High praise. Yuri mused on how he'd immediately followed that up by becoming so spectacularly uncooperative that Bernard just gave up on him entirely. Classic. So now, Yuri announced to Bernard that he was ready to be taught for real. Because he was officially done messing around, Bernard actually agreed, announcing that the real training was about to begin. And without a moment's hesitation, he came at Yuri like a freight train. Yuri yelped for a timeout, suddenly recalling Bernard's charming old nickname, the Sword Demon. Yuri, though definitely feeling that hit, was still on his feet, thinking that if it weren't for his past life as a mercenary, he'd be a puddle on the floor by now. The training was a killer, but Yuri could already feel himself leveling up like crazy. Bernard, looking genuinely surprised by Yuri's grit, muttered that he'd actually grown up. And right on cue, Anna popped up, calling for Yuri and announcing that the king wanted to see him. Yuri couldn't help but wonder what he was in trouble for now. Anna explained that Count Johannes and his son had arrived. Yuri's mood soured, remembering how Johannes's little angel had sold him out and let enemies stroll right into Betrayal. A storm cloud passed over his face as he growled. And where is that little snake right now? Yuri found himself at the world's most awkward dinner party, stuck at a table with his two older brothers, his father, Johannes, and the guest of dishonor, Goth. Johannes commented that Yuri had really changed, even packed on some muscle. The king, however, joked that Yuri must have eaten something weird. Johannes then suggested Yuri share his secret with Goth, who was, let's just say, still lacking in the oomph department. Goth, feeling the heat from Yuri's glare, finally met his eyes. One of Yuri's brothers, Ever, the detective, asked if there was some drama between the two. Yuri just deadpanned. Oh. Goth just stepped on my toes a while back. His brother smirked. So, you're finally going to be a big deal now. Yuri watched Goth roll his eyes and thought, yep, same old brat. His personality hasn't changed one bit. Yuri couldn't shake the feeling this whole dinner was just a stage for Goth. He told himself this timeline couldn't be a repeat of the last disaster. Last time, Goth's little grudge got their entire country sold down the river. So, after the meal, Yuri, his brothers, and Goth took a little stroll to the garden. Yuri tossed a stick to Goth, grabbed one for himself, and said, "The kingdom doesn't need knights with paper-thin skin. You're supposed to be a knight fighting for the future," Yuri said, and then immediately launched himself into the duel. He landed a solid hit on Goth, and even threw in a kick for good measure. Goth, struggling, whined for Yuri to uphold chivalry. In response, Yuri just dropped his sword, charged, and kicked Goth again, sending him stumbling. He then pointed Goth's own sword at his throat and asked why Mr. Son of a Great Count thought his fancy title was a get-out-of-jail-free card. Yuri thought to himself that he knew, deep down, Goth hated living like this. He pulled Goth to his feet and asked, "Is that really such a hard question? Not a single knight I know thinks that way, including me." Yuri pushed on, asking why he thought his father was a count, and how that power led directly to the mess they were in. He told Goth to look past the shiny surface and figure out what it all really meant, and to choose his next words very, very carefully. Goth got the message and scrammed. That's when Yuri's brother piped up about how surprisingly good Yuri was at brawling. Yuri shot back. "What? You thought I was going to lose?" And his brother just nodded. So Yuri pressed, "Okay. What do you really think of me?" And his brother laid it all out, calling him the single biggest troublemaker and most degenerate gambler in the entire kingdom. Then he added, "But you're not that guy anymore. So you two better not start any drama." His brother just stared, clearly wondering if Yuri had finally cracked. As the sun went down, Yuri was still getting his butt kicked in sword practice by Bernard. Utterly spent, he just collapsed on the ground. Bernard moseyed on over and said, "All right, that's enough theatrics for one day. It's time you learned the mana method." Yuri perked up, asking if Bernard would teach him his own personal technique. Bernard flat out refused, saying it was way out of Yuri's league. Instead, he said, "You're going to learn the Brio method. It's an absolutely top-tier approach to mana pure. Efficient, and seriously powerful." Yuri just thought to himself, yeah, I mastered this in my first life and basically rewrote the book on it as a mercenary. Bernard snapped his fingers in front of his face. Hello, you off in La La Land or something? I suggest you check out some of the Royal Guards, he said. Find someone whose natural talent is a little more aligned with your current skills. After a moment of thought, Bernard suggested, you know, if we're talking pure, raw aptitude, Gerard is a monster. Yuri's mind flashed back to meeting Gerard at the bitter end of the war. It was honestly baffling that the guy had managed to survive that long. Considering how completely hopeless everything had been, Gerard had always been a prodigy. And he'd once sworn that if he could turn back time, he'd train himself into an early grave. Yuri thought about how by the end of the war, both he and Gerard had become as useless as a couple of thoroughly rusted-out swords. He wondered how in the world he should approach Gerard now. He finally decided the guy needed a serious wake-up call. He asked Bernard if they could pop in on the resident slacker nights. As the night shift leader watched his men train, Yuri strolled over, wanting to check on their progress. The leader replied, well, they're not as amazing as you. 10, sir. But they're giving it their all. Yuri glanced at the highly motivated guys before asking, and where's Gerard? The man pointed towards the new recruit. And it all clicked. Yuri finally got what Bernard was talking about. The whole point of training was to push yourself. But Gerard was literally doing just enough to not get kicked out. Yuri turned to the leader, Rosso, and said, bring me a wooden sword. I'm feeling a duel. Rosso eagerly agreed, asking, of course, who's the lucky opponent? Yuri just pointed and said, I want to dance with the lazy one. Gerard. As they faced each other, the other knights started laughing at Gerard. Yuri, on the other hand, actually respected him. He said, I heard you're a genius. Gerard, this is your chance to prove it. So, don't let me down. Yuri lunged forward to attack. But Gerard deflected it without breaking a sweat. His form was flawless, clean, and precise. But something felt wrong. It was too perfect. Almost like Gerard was deliberately matching his speed. It dawned on them both that this wasn't a fight, it was a performance. Yuri grinned. All right. Let's do this for real. He attacked again, only for Gerard to block the hit with almost inhuman reflexes. Yuri threw everything he had at him. But Gerard dodged every single swing, casually remarking, guess I'll take it easy on you. Then, with a flick of his wrist, Gerard landed a clean hit on Yuri. In that instant, Yuri knew it was hopeless. He didn't stand a snowball's chance against this guy. Still, his pride wouldn't let him quit. He was determined to land at least one solid hit. And finally, through sheer grit, he managed to tag Gerard. A satisfied smirk crossed his face as he said, now that's times more like it. The crowd was absolutely floored. They were all buzzing. Man, the prince really packs a punch. Yuri just chuckled. Oh, Gerard's not about to just let me win. Gerard had to agree, even though he was the one on the attack. He felt like he was being backed into a corner. Yuri lunged again, a razor-thin close call that barely missed Gerard. That was it. Gerard's temper finally flared. He was about to unleash his signature move on the third prince. The onlookers gasped, shouting for Yuri to brace himself as the attack whipped in from the side. The crowd held its breath, wondering if Yuri was okay. But Yuri, totally unfazed, just deadpanned. Is this your first time sparring? Gerard, seriously. He then casually tied a cloth around his arm, adding, all right. Now things are getting fun. Let's keep it going. There was absolutely no reason to stop now. As their swords clashed again, it started dawning on Gerard that Yuri was different. He was pushing himself to the absolute limit, driving himself way past his own breaking point. Gerard felt as if his entire body was on fire. It was an intensity he'd never experienced in his life. Not even fighting against opponents who were supposedly stronger than him. Yuri was definitely stirring something deep inside him. As Yuri rushed in to attack, Gerard swiftly dodged and countered. He even shattered Yuri's sword in the process. Yuri stopped cold, acknowledging, "All right. Match is over," and admitted, "I actually learned a thing or two from you, Gerard." They shook hands, and Gerard couldn't help but appreciate Yuri's good sportsmanship. He'd never faced that kind of intensity, that sheer determination, from anyone before. As Gerard was lost in the moment, Yuri piped up, What's the deal? You're just gonna stand there holding my hand and spacing out." A flustered Gerard quickly apologized before practically running away. The other knights, completely blown away by Yuri's performance, swarmed around, asking when their captain had arrived. Captain Seiyun, however, just noticed Yuri lying on the ground, a thoughtful look on his face. A few days later, as Gerard was walking down the corridor, Yuri popped up and asked, "Hey, you off the clock?" He then invited Gerard to tag along, saying they had somewhere to be. Gerard protested, "I still have training to get to." But Yuri just waved him off. "Come on. I'm the one who knocked some sense back into you. You kind of owe me a favor." Gerard reluctantly agreed. But Yuri could see his posture tighten up. He was clearly still on the fence about this. Gerard was thinking, where in the world is he dragging me, fearing it might be something dangerous. Yuri just laughed. "Relax. Don't get your armor in a twist. Besides," he explained, "I'm bringing one more person." He then called out, "Hey, Hernando." The royal mage shuffled over. Yuri told him they had a little field trip planned and that he was going to need his help. Hernando said, "Sorry. I've got some pressing business." Without missing a beat, Yuri offered, "How about I make that gambling debt of yours disappear for your troubles?" "I'm serious," he insisted. "Every single thing you've lost to me in the past will be completely wiped clean." He even added, "And hey, if I've ever led you astray, I'll make it right." Hernando got all defensive. "I have no idea what you're talking about. I've never seen you outside the gambling den." Yuri, however, was totally firm. "I'll handle everything," he stated. "Now, you're coming with me." Hernando paused for a moment, then whipped out a piece of paper and demanded, "Put it in writing." Yuri just smirked, dismissing the idea. "Oh, come on. The name of the third prince is worth a lot less than you seem to think." He then shot Gerard a look, promising he'd vouch for Yuri and stand by every word he said. Once, Gerard finally agreed. A smug grin spread across Hernando's face as he announced, "All right. Let's get this show on the road." Gerard raised an eyebrow. "And where exactly are we off to that requires both a royal knight and a mage in tow?" "To Sword Mountain," Yuri replied coolly. "From there, we're crashing the Founder's dungeon." And just like that, they entered the dark passage, with Gerard taking the lead. Hernando whistled, his voice echoing, "Well, I had no idea the royal palace came with a secret creepy basement. So, what's at the end of this lovely, dark tunnel?" Gerard asked. Yuri's reply was short and sweet, "Sword Mountain." Gerard's eyes widened. "You don't mean times the times, Sword Mountain, the one from all the wild legends about the founder?" Yuri just nodded. He remembered the first time he heard about this dungeon. Back then, he explained, this place was just a glorified escape route. Survival was the only thing on the menu. He continued, his tone hardening. "But this time, I'm not just running away. I'm moving forward. No more looking back. I'm going to see the legacy my ancestors left behind with my own two eyes." They finally stepped out into a forest. "So, is this the grand opening of Sword Mountain?" Hernando asked, looking around. "And where's the key for that big door up ahead?" "It's jammed in the corner of the study," Yuri said with a sigh. "I learned the hard way what happens when you don't know what it's for." He shot a look at Hernando, adding, "And you don't need to know the bloody details." With that, they pressed onward, without warning. Spikes shot out from the walls, zipping past Hernando's hand. "Hey, be careful." Yuri snapped. And stick close unless you want to end up as a kebab. Hernando, clutching his heart, leaned over to Gerard. Did Yuri eat something weird for breakfast? He seems extra prickly today. Gerard was thinking the exact same thing. But before he could reply, Yuri shouted, "Are you two going to stand there and gossip? Or are you coming?" He suddenly held up a hand, freezing them in place. "We've got company," he whispered, pointing. "A pack of direwolves. And where there's a pack, there's always more. I read about them in a book," he added matter-of-factly. Hernando looked floored. "Wait. You actually read?" Yuri just rolled his eyes. "Let's just slip past them quietly." But of course, as if on cue, Hernando stepped on the single loudest twig in the entire forest. With a loud times snap asterisk. Every wolf's head turned their way. Before the first one could even pounce, Gerard was already a blur of motion. He dropped the nearest wolf with a single, clean strike. "Not bad," Yuri commented. "But be warned. Their fur is ridiculously tough. You'll need to channel some mana to punch through it," he yelled, giving Gerard a thumbs up. Their little scuffle, however, had just rung the dinner bell for the pack leader. As more wolves swarmed them, Gerard commanded, "Stay close to me." In the next instant, two of the beasts lunged straight for him. He cut them down effortlessly. Hernando let out an impressed whistle. "Okay. I get it now. That's some top-tier royal guard work right there." "He's not wrong," Yuri agreed. "But don't get cocky. We've still got a long way to go." He then turned to Hernando with a smirk. "All right. Mr. Mage, your turn. Show me those skills my father can't stop bragging about." Hernando grinned and unleashed a wave of fire at the wolves. He expertly scorched the beasts, driving them back. After they'd finished off the last of the furry minions, the forest fell silent. "I'll be honest. I didn't expect another welcoming party after the direwolves," Yuri commented. Gerard sighed. "Well, our furry friends delayed us a bit. But at least we've finally reached the peak of Sword Mountain. The only problem was, there was a whole lot of nothing special around them." "Yeah. This is a bit underwhelming," Yuri agreed, starting to scan the area. After a moment, his eyes lit up. He stumbled upon a rock that they absolutely had to get out of the way. Gerard called over to Hernando for a hand. But Hernando was too busy inspecting his own. He whined that a scratch on a man's hand was a total travesty. After they finally heaved the stone aside, they found a sword just lying there. Hernando swore it felt like the thing had been buried since the dawn of time. Yuri just stared at the sword, a pensive look on his face, like he could feel the weight of its long, hidden story. Gerard, catching on, breathed that this was the legacy their ancestors left for them, but Yuri didn't say another word about it. Then, out of nowhere, the ground started to rumble beneath their feet. Yuri, sensing they were in deep trouble, muttered, "Oh, brilliant. Did we just trigger something?" The earth split wide open, and all three of them tumbled into the pitch-black abyss. Yuri landed right on top of Gerard and couldn't help but wonder if he'd just used his body as a mana-fueled shield to protect him. Hernando conjured a small light. His expression grim, he sighed, realizing this mess was way more complicated than he'd first thought. Then turned to Yuri, asking if he'd really just ignored the prince's safety to save himself. Yuri shot back that it was a life-or-death situation. Hernando suddenly yelped and pointed off into the darkness, insisting that he just saw something move over there. Yuri didn't even bother to look, telling him that trying to change the subject was a cheap trick that wouldn't work. "No. I'm serious," Hernando insisted. I think it's a ghost." Yuri finally turned, and his eyes widened at the sight of a death knight. He asked Gerard to get up, but Gerard, completely wiped out, didn't move. So, Yuri gave him a firm shake to snap him out of it. Gerard sat up, looking totally lost about where they were, until he laid eyes on the knight. He shot to his feet, shoving Yuri behind him and declaring, "Stay back. I'll handle this. Yuri knew this was a death knight, an entity far more powerful than it ever was in life. He gently reassured Gerard that it wasn't dangerous, as he could sense its true purpose. Yuri figured the mage was guarding this dungeon, or maybe even their ancestors. So, there was no reason it would be hostile to someone from their own bloodline. He stepped forward and introduced himself. He said clearly, "I am Yuri Betrayal." In that instant, the knight drew its sword and prepared to attack. Hernando screamed out Yuri's name, warning him that the thing was going to kill him. The knight's blade slammed into the ground, and Hernando couldn't believe his eyes, shrieking that he'd just seen the prince's head get split clean in two. Yuri shot him a look, warning him to watch what he was saying. But Hernando was still frozen in shock, still in absolute awe of how the knight had managed to part his hair so perfectly. The knight finally spoke, its voice dripping with contempt. It said that the prince's smug attitude was a dead ringer for someone it once knew. Yuri asked just who the knight was talking about. The knight growled the name Eric Bale. Hernando explained that Eric Betrayal was a legendary figure that no one could possibly forget. He was the unrivaled swordsman who conquered the entire continent with just one sword and was the founder of the Baal Kingdom. Eric had also been its very first king. Yuri then asked the knight, "So, am I the first one to ever make it to this place?" The knight confirmed it. It explained that unless someone was a direct descendant of Betrayal, they wouldn't have a prayer of drawing that sword. Yuri finally understood that it was the ultimate treasured blade used by his own ancestor. The knight then added that he himself had wielded it in the past. Yuri, feeling a pang of guilt, apologized for touching something that clearly wasn't his to touch. The knight simply asked why he had come here. Yuri replied that he came to claim the legacy of his ancestors. The knight turned its back to him, declaring that the time had finally come for it to fulfill its duty and that it would give Yuri what he came for. Yuri followed the knight, while Gerard just stood there, muttering in total disbelief. Seriously, a heart-to-heart with a death knight, this was definitely not on his vision board. Yuri shouted at the knight, basically asking what his deal was, which sent a jolt of unwelcome nostalgia through Jared. With a heavy sigh, he decided to follow Yuri's lead. As they approached the glowing blue crystals, the knight sat down, looking at Yuri like a judge at a talent show. Then, poof, a bright light swallowed them, and Yuri found himself in a wide-open field with a sword in his hand. He glanced around and spotted a figure, wondering, is that the founder? But his hopes were dashed when he realized the thing was not human and was charging right at him. It clicked pretty fast for Yuri that this must be the legendary man of the sword. Yuri figured out this was a watch-and-learn kind of deal for Mana, and he chuckled, thinking their founder must have been a special kind of crazy, trying to teach wizardry to someone who hadn't even cracked open Mana for dummies. Only a guy on his second playthrough of life would come up with that. Yuri touched the ground, trying to feel the Mana, but he was completely lost and had to ask for a proper do-over. The figure in front of him just smiled, which totally set Yuri off. A fire lit inside him. He had to get stronger, no matter the cost. He was going to crush every single bad guy and never let the past repeat its greatest mistakes. He whispered to himself, "So this is the swordsmanship of Eric Betrayal," and got ready to swing in sync with the ghostly figure. He was determined to absorb every last drop of this lesson. Meanwhile, Jared's eyes snapped open on a training ground. He looked around, completely baffled. This felt way too real for a dream. "All right. Who's hiding?" he called out. And suddenly, a figure appeared, and Jared realized he was staring at his own reflection. "You've got to be kidding me," he said. "Are you also Jared?" The copy shot back, telling him not to fight his fate, reminding him that royal guards always had it easy. But he warned Jared to keep his distance from the princess, saying it would only bring more heartache. Jared's mind flashed back to a time when he would have agreed completely. But that wasn't him anymore. He knew that once a sword is swung, you can't take it back. And all this self-doubt was just messing with his head. Jared's copy summoned a sword and rushed in to attack. The fight began, with both of them stuck in a ridiculously defensive loop. It was a far cry from the reckless Jared of the past. He finally broke the stalemate and landed a solid hit on his double. "Honestly, this is just boring," he quipped after he struck. "A gross, Mud-like substance oozed out of the copy. It quickly morphed into a giant mud monster. It hit Jared then that Yuri must be in his own crazy fight. And he prayed his friend could pull through. Meanwhile, pulling through was a bit of an overstatement for what Yuri was doing in his own battle. He was seriously banged up. And as another hit landed, he went limp, totally unable to defend himself, except that strike was actually Yuri's, who had sprung up to counter his opponent's attack. He then wondered, man, how much time has passed? The sheer danger of the situation hit him like a ton of bricks. He was incredibly grateful for his chasing blade technique. It had literally just saved his skin. In that very moment, something just clicked. And Yuri was finally starting to get the hang of things. He saw his opponent's sword shatter and dissolve into light. The mysterious figure then raised a hand towards Yuri. It was a sign of respect. A silent, thank you. The next thing he knew, Yuri was back in the dungeon. Seeing that Deep and Jared had also returned, the knight chimed in. Seems like you had a nice little dream. He went on to explain that this was all part of Eric's agreement, so that a little something would be waiting for his future descendants. You know. Whenever they finally decided to show up, Yuri vaguely recalled the Empire having completely wrecked that mountain ages ago, which probably explained the lack of family tourism. He then asked if the founder used the mana method, but the knight shot that down, revealing it was Eric's final masterpiece, something he cooked up by mixing all the enlightenment he gained while wandering the East in his later years. It was the ultimate parting gift, and Yuri was the very first person to get his hands on it. This made Yuri wonder why this ultimate legacy wasn't just handed to the royal family, and why it was hidden away like this. The knight explained that the dungeon was basically on a magical timer and wouldn't open until the moment was right. And now that it was open, it meant it was time to unleash that power. Yuri couldn't help but wonder when exactly that was supposed to be, but the knight admitted he didn't have a clue either, and told Yuri it was his problem to figure out. Yuri then eyed the sword and asked what its name was. The knight proudly announced it was called Simhum, a name Eric himself had picked out. The knight then instructed Yuri to take a knee so he could officially receive the ancestral legacy. As Yuri went along with it, the Dark Knight placed a hand on him and told him to never, ever get spooked by his enemies. Yuri agreed, and the knight continued, telling him to chase what he believed in and to fulfill the duty of burial. Yuri agreed to the whole spiel. Then the knight, in a sudden fit of rage, grabbed a fistful of Yuri's hair, warning him that Brielle would never ditch its owner, even if it meant biting the dust. That was the oath of Brielle, and with that dramatic exit line, the knight vanished. The next morning, Yuri was stirred awake by Ina, who was staring right at his face. Ina gently asked if he was exhausted. Noting that he'd come in awfully late, he explained he'd been pulling an all-nighter in the royal archives, digging for a specific record. He was pretty sure he'd found out Eric had a sibling who ditched their honor and just poofed from history, leaving behind not so much as a name. Yuri had a gut feeling that this mystery person had to be the Death Knight and the sword's original owner. Ina told him to get changed because the king was looking for him. Yuri wondered what he'd done now, but Ina had no idea. The king just wanted to see him the second his meeting with Hernando was over. Yuri's stomach dropped as he remembered Hernando mentioning he was going to report absolutely everything to the king next time they talked, because he felt it was the right thing to do. Yuri just knew everything had already been tattled to the king. When he met his father, the king started with, "Sneaking out of the palace was bad enough, but you had to go and one-up yourself. Didn't you? Found the founder's dungeon at Sword Mountain, and even picked up a sword." The king continued, saying that lately, he'd been hearing a lot of gossip from people about how different Yuri had become, and he flat out asked him to explain what had gotten into him. Yuri stayed silent. His father pressed him, asking if he was just going to stand there. Yuri finally answered that it wasn't that he didn't want to talk. Qatar then asked why he looked so stressed, pointing to his clenched fist, and told him to just spit it out. Yuri finally confessed that he had a dream where he'd committed a terrible sin. His father's face grew serious as he asked what, precisely, he had done in that dream. Yuri replied that in his dream, he had failed Brielle right up to the very end. The dream showed Brielle engulfed in a huge war where countless people were wiped out. Yuri explained he tried to turn things around, but in the end, he failed. After the kingdom was destroyed, he'd basically face-planted into a disgraceful exile, dying with zero street cred. Then, he jolted awake from the nightmare, only to see the necklace from his mom was heating up like a forgotten pizza pocket, and right then, it hit him. Maybe this wasn't just a bad dream, but more like a supernatural you-up text from his mother. His dad grilled him, asking what apocalyptic force had trashed the kingdom in his little siesta vision. Yuri figured it was way too early to drop the Empire bomb. Besides, since he was currently meddling with the timeline, there was a teeny tiny chance the whole Empire invasion thing might just not happen. Fingers crossed. Yuri, trying to sound convincing, just said, "Not sure. Dad." Looked like some kind of goth army with a mysterious backstory. His father nodded, saying whether it was a spicy nightmare or a ghostly memo from Mom. He was just happy Yuri was finally getting his act together. Yuri internally scoffed at that, feeling less like he'd gathered his resolve and more like he was desperately trying to unfail the biggest test of his life. Fair enough, his dad said. But there's one more item on the agenda. He then looked at Yuri and said, "Go fetch the sword." Yuri's father, the one and only Betrayal, was a certified prodigy who was probably holding a sword before he could even say Dada. The man collected every first-place title out there, basically autographing the entire continent with his ridiculously epic sword skills. Yuri remembered how people used to have this sort of top 10 strongest celebrity list for the continent, and his dad was always the one everyone whispered was flirting with the #1 spot. To put it simply, he was hailed as the continent's undisputed swordmaster, playing in a league so far above everyone else. They needed a telescope to see him. Yuri was led into his father's private training hall, a VIP lounge of pain and suffering he'd never been invited to before. His father flat out stated that none of his sons had a gift for the sword. Yuri begged to differ, thinking, "Hey, I'm at least a little talented with the pointy end." His dad then whipped out his own sword, aimed it at Yuri, and asked, "So, what do you think talent with a sword even is? Hotshot. Is it being born super strong, super fast, having cat-like reflexes, or maybe some kind of cheat code level instinct?" He mused. "Let's say you had all that. Would that make you a swordsman?" But then his dad shot the idea down himself. He added that the real secret ingredient, more crucial than any of that, was the little voice that screams at you to push past your breaking point. It was a feeling that went way beyond just dodging a sharp object. It was a sense of duty. Yuri felt the whole vibe in the room shift. Like his dad had just turned on his serious business aura, his father sheathed his sword, admitting he didn't really have the words to describe this calling of the sword. He said it was something that you couldn't just explain over coffee. Yuri wondered. So, it's like destiny, like finding the one. But it's a weapon. His dad considered it. Something like that. Maybe. Yuri thought about how, in his past life, he and the sword were definitely not destined for each other. But now he wondered if this was his new fate. His father got closer, his voice low. "So, should you be holding a sword? Can you hear it whispering sweet nothings to you? And even when you're about to check out, will that sword still be your +1? Yuri just shook his head. "Honestly, I'm feeling nothing. All I see is you, looking terrifyingly intense. And I'm hearing a chorus of voices screaming at me to book it. Oh, and someone's asking for help. So that's new." The whole scene gave him a nasty case of déjà vu, reminding him of that day people were getting taken out. And he was just standing there like a statue. He blinked, wondering why Braille was on fire. Right. Enemies. They were coming for him. The last prince of Braille. The final prize in the set. Yuri's eyes widened as he recognized their uniforms. The Imperial Army. Wait, he thought. Did I rewind all the way back to the season finale? An enemy lunged at him from behind. And on pure instinct, Yuri's sword met him. One attacker down. Just in the nick of time, his own soldiers appeared, shouting that they'd hold the line and telling Yuri, "Your Highness, now would be an excellent time to lead the strategic sprint out of here." Yuri couldn't shake the feeling he'd seen this nightmare before. wondering if Brio was really doomed to just fall apart. For a second, he thought it was hopeless. But then he charged headfirst into the fray. He'd already sworn he'd never back down from a fight. The Death Knight's words echoed in his mind, "Do what you believe in." And damn it, he was going to protect Braille until his last breath. He became a whirlwind of steel, cutting down enemies one after another and weaving through their attacks like a dancer. And that's when some jerk yelled out that Yuri was a dead man walking and should just give up. Fueled by pure rage, Yuri channeled mana into his blade and roared that Braille would never surrender its honor, not even if it meant staring death in the face, and with that, he unleashed a devastating blow. He was ready to fulfill his duty to Braille, right to the bitter end. When suddenly, he was right back where he started, with his father calling his name. Yuri blinked, his head spinning as the vision of that dark army faded. His dad told him to take a breath, insisting it was all in his head. Shaking it off, Yuri focused back on the sword. His father admitted he'd been wrong, and that Yuri was clearly meant to wield a sword. Yuri just nodded in agreement, telling his dad that his mind was made up. The look on his father's face completely changed, and Yuri swore. Anyone who saw that expression would think he'd just signed his own death warrant. He quickly grabbed his dad's hand to reassure him, saying, "Hey, don't worry. I'm a genius. Remember." His father responded by raising a hand like he was about to bonk Yuri on the head. And so, Yuri started his sword training with a brand new lump on his head. Reard took one look and asked who clocked him. Yuri just sighed and said it was his dad. Bernard smirked, commenting that the king must have been feeling extra generous with his love taps. "But don't think that means I'm going to go easy on you in training." Yuri totally got it. He figured Bernard only stuck around Braille because of his old man. "So," he asked, "did you stay on the condition you'd get a duel with my father?" Bernard didn't deny it, but Yuri pressed on. "You know, even if you don't get to fight my dad, I'd still want you to stay." Bernard scoffed. "Sounds more like you want me to stay. And if you want that, you'll have to show me something worth my time. Something tempting, like the swordsmanship of the founder." "Eric." Yuri raised an eyebrow. "You want to learn his technique?" Bernard shrugged. "Let's just say I'm a little curious." Yuri smirked. "It might be a bit tricky. Then again, with a nickname like the Sword Demon, maybe it's right up your alley." Bernard just waved it off. "That's fine. I don't need to master it completely. I've already factored that in." "Fair enough," Yuri said. "But it might not be as helpful as you think. The swordsmanship is basically fused with a unique mana method." To prove his point, Yuri summoned a mana sword, explaining, "See, the two are completely tangled up." Bernard had to admit, he'd never heard of anything like it. Mana methods are supposed to power up your swordsmanship, not the other way around. Yuri nodded. "Exactly. And that's why it's a nightmare to pass down and will probably always be incomplete." "I see," Bernard said. "But even if it's incomplete, I'll take it. I'll work my butt off to make it work for Braille's style." He was pretty sure he could at least get the gist of some of it. Yuri saw the fire in Bernard's eyes and grinned. "All right then. Just remember, you're staying in Braille. We had a deal." Bernard gave a nod, whipped out his sword, and was like, "All right, just show me the technique." Yuri smirked and got his own blade ready for the demonstration. Then, completely out of the blue, Bernard mentioned, "Oh, by the way, I never got around to telling you, but I'm planning on staying in Braille." Yuri's jaw practically hit the floor at the news, and Bernard just cheekily asked, "So, are you going to attack, or just stand there?" He then declared, "Because if not, I'm starting." A frustrated Yuri yelled, "Why didn't you say so sooner?" and charged forward to attack. "You can't just drop that kind of news on me," he shouted. Later that day, Yuri was sprawled out in his room, thinking it all over. He was reflecting on everything when it hit him. It wasn't that Braille was going to be destroyed because of his mistakes. It was that a totally different future was slowly taking shape. Even though he hadn't made any huge moves yet, Bernard, deciding to stay in Braille, was solid proof that things were already changing. The whole process of messing with the future always felt like fumbling around in the dark, but there was no denying it. Things were definitely evolving. Yuri knew, however, that this one change wasn't nearly enough by itself. Now, he had to stop the Empire. And he was dead set on it. Just then, as if on cue, Ina said, "Try not to cause any trouble." "Okay." Yuri looked at her, confused. "What are you talking about? Did I have other, more chaotic plans I forgot about?" She gave him a look. "You cause trouble every single day. Do you even realize what you're saying anymore? But more importantly, you have that big meeting tomorrow." She reminded him. "The Elders' Council. Your father said you'd be joining." Yuri had to be there first thing. Most of the council would be there, and a few of them were some seriously intimidating. Strict old guys. Anna grabbed Yuri's hand, her eyes wide. "Please, just don't punch anyone." He gave her a reassuring smile. "Don't worry. I'm not that guy anymore." She just stared. "Promise me." He sigged. "Fine. I promise." In the meeting, a man slammed his fist on the table, his face red with anger. Yuri couldn't help but think. Asterisk. Well, Anna was right to be worried. The opposition came right out of the gate from Duke Gennard, who argued that it was completely improper for the king to learn some unverified mana method. Yuri found himself thinking about the original point of the Elders' Council. It was supposed to be for discussing national affairs, but now it just felt like a dedicated committee for undermining royal authority. He was finally starting to see why his father always managed to have a conflict during these meetings. Gennard was adamant that it would be much better for them all to just stick to the traditional Braille method. Another man chimed in, defending the technique as the founder's legacy, not something unproven. Gennard shot back. "And how can we be so certain it's truly the founder's legacy?" A different council member gasped dramatically. "Are you suggesting you doubt His Highness?" Gennard puffed up his chest and replied, "I'm merely saying we must be absolutely certain. For everyone's safety, isn't that why we're here? To discuss the future. So," Yuri cut in, his voice perfectly steady, "you gathered the entire Elders' Council just to debate my choice of mana method. I'm so honored." He refused to lower his gaze, thinking, asterisk, "We stopped bowing to the Emperor after Bell fell. Asterisk, and these guys are still talking so high and mighty." Asterisk. Gennard then turned to Sane, demanding, "What is your opinion?" Sane replied thoughtfully, "I'm not entirely sure. Every mana method has its strengths and weaknesses, and different people have different natural talents for them." Gennard threw his hands up for effect. "You see, does everyone see the problem here?" Chiming in that even the captain of the Royal Guard thought the mana method was sketchy. He basically called it a ticking time bomb that needed to be tossed out. Another council member jumped in, trying to correct him, insisting that's not at all what Sane was getting at. Apparently, Sane's point was that every mana method has its own special something. Then, some guy next to Gennard dramatically shot to his feet, proclaiming the Duke was just so terribly concerned that the mana method might give poor Yuri a boo-boo. Yuri could feel the room turning on him, thinking, "Oh great, here we go again." He was internally kicking himself, thinking that if he hadn't already dived into this mana method, he could have just hit the reset button on his core. But no. Thanks to that little vision from the founder, that sword was already making itself at home in there, which made starting over completely impossible. And how could he explain that to this bunch? He was totally stuck, wondering what his next brilliant move was. Just when all hope seemed lost, Calcio's voice cut through the noise, remarking on how all the men in the room were full of hot air. He then casually asked if any of them had ever, actually fought an orc. The room went silent, all eyes on Calcio, before Gennard sneered, asking who he was and what his title was. Calcio introduced himself as a free baron, and Gennard just about laughed in his face, asking if he was serious, a mere free baron, gracing the Council of Elders with his presence. Calcio shot back that trust him. He didn't want to be here either. But what's a guy to do? Count Sitter had basically pawned the job off on him. Yuri's mind raced Sitter, the border count holding the line at the edges of Brill. Now that was a lord who actually earned his fancy title. The guy fought on the front lines. A true soldier who lived in the dirt. And he was legendary for hating these stuffy noble get-togethers, which made Yuri wonder what on earth could have possessed him to suddenly send a guy to this circus. Maine then piped up, asking why Sidor had bothered sending anyone. Calcio just sighed, saying he really didn't feel like getting into it. But after watching all these high and mighty nobles play their little political games from their comfy chairs, he was starting to get it. As far as he was concerned, the flavor of mana method you use doesn't mean squat on a real battlefield. Whether it's the Braille style or the Empire's fancy lion fang art. What really counts is the person swinging the sword. He then locked eyes with Yuri and asked, "What do you think? The kid wants to learn the mana method of the kingdom's founding king. Why is everyone's armor in a twist over that?" And no matter what any of these clowns said, Yuri was dead set on mastering the founder's mana method. Calcio went on, saying the prince's instincts as a swordsman had led him to follow the path of their founder. So why were a bunch of guys with neither the power nor the guts to back it up making such a fuss? He guessed it was all the bookworms who've never even held a sword that were squawking the loudest. Gennard, fuming, told him to just spit it out. Calcio gave a mock apology for his lack of manners, asking them to forgive him, since fighting orcs every day tends to make one a little more rough around the edges. Then he leaned in and asked his question again. "So, how many of you have actually fought an orc?" The silence was deafening. Calcio just smiled and pressed on, asking if they seriously believed those giant, slobbering orcs gave a damn about their preferred mana method. Someone finally sputtered that Calcio was completely out of line. But he did concede that Yuri was, after all, just a boy who might not know any better. Yuri thought, "Is this guy seriously saying I made a bad call and the whole system needs a reboot? Did they not get how impossible it was to just change something so deeply ingrained?" Calcio chimed in that, from the looks of it, Yuri wasn't planning on backing down anytime soon. He then deadpanned, asking if the plan was to just forcibly rip the core out of him. The man fumed. But Calcio shot back, "Well, if that's not on the table, then what exactly is the point of this whole dramatic meeting?" He then glanced at Yuri, asking, "You getting this, kid?" But there they all were, sitting around and totally messing with Yuri's head. Seemed like the folks in the royal capital had way too much time on their hands. At the mention of free time, Gennard slammed his fist on the table, calling it an unbelievably insolent remark. He added with a sneer, "By that logic, the border's been a real cakewalk, too, considering the budget we throw at it." Calcio glared at him. "It's only quiet because hundreds of soldiers die. If you haven't seen the daily reports of men dropping out there, then you must be both blind and deaf." He paused, his voice low. "Even on the very day I left the border, 4 men died. One of them was a friend I'd shared breakfast and jokes with that same morning. I had to lay his funeral cloth myself." His eyes narrowed. "The orcs don't take vacations. They're a charming race that lives for nothing but fighting and spilling blood." As Yuri processed this, he remembered the whole messy drama between Braille and the Klein Duchy around that time. In all the chaos, the orcs had swarmed across the borders, throwing a massive, destructive party. Yuri then asked, "Have their movements changed at all?" Calcio nodded grimly, saying things had felt way more sinister than usual. He then asked about Klein and the duchy. Did Klein station any troops over there? Calcio replied that the border guard had just up and vanished without a word. Yuri's face fell. What about the nearby border villages? Calcio's voice was heavy. Wiped out. The people were either slaughtered or dragged away as slaves. It was a complete catastrophe. Yuri connected the dots, wondering if this was a civil war. Did the Duke's third son mess something up? The room went completely still. Yuri stood, breaking the silence. I think we've had enough story time for one day. As he walked out, Gennard demanded, What do you mean? Enough, Yuri replied without turning. How about we move on to things a little more urgent than this young man's little mana trick? You know, like defending against Klein's duchy. The orcs. and maybe not putting a teenager under a microscope, the scene changes to Calcio's room, where he was reporting to his superior. His leader's voice crackled through. What did the third princess have to say? Calcio reported. The rumors say he's a completely different person. But his eyes don't seem to have gotten the memo about the big change. The man on the other end insisted. We need to watch him closely. I want you to dig deeper into this Yuri kid. Galchosiged. There's not much to go on yet. We'll have to do some serious digging to find anything. Fine. The man agreed. I'll make it happen if I have to. Talk to you later. Calcio hung up and gazed out the window. He couldn't help but notice how ridiculously peaceful it was here. While soldiers were dying every single day back on the border, and then he saw him. Yuri, of all people, was strolling through the market, which made Calcio do a double take. He was with Hernando. Out on the town, Hernando was grinning at Yuri. I'm definitely not supposed to be out of the palace. Just like you asked. It's actually kind of a rush. He added. I used to run away from home all the time as a kid. Yuri raised an eyebrow. Are we talking, like, a 3 times a day escape artist? Hernando laughed out loud. Guilty as charged, I was quite the little delinquent back in my day. Just then, Hernando spotted a lady giving them some serious side-eye and wondered if they were already busted. Yuri just smirked. Are you really this excited? I thought you could leave the palace whenever you pleased. Hernando shot back that if he'd come out alone, it would have just been a boring stroll. But with Yuri, it felt like a proper rebellion. He then leaned in. So, what's the grand scheme? Yuri simply said. Oh, something is definitely about to happen. Just not while you're around to see it. Hernando clutched his chest dramatically. Ouch. You wound me. Yuri. He then asked. So, where to? My partner in crime, Yuri's eyes glinted. The casino. The biggest illegal one in the entire capital. Hernando did a full-on triple take. Wait a minute. Didn't you just promise me we weren't doing anything bad? He asked, with a long, suffering sigh. Just lead the way. And don't you dare pretend you don't know the place. Hernandukov. Well, on the rare occasion, I've had one too many. I don't always make it home. I sometimes wake up there, he admitted. Yuri cut in. Just so we're clear. Every bit of this is for Betrayal. Hernando looked utterly floored. Good heavens. How much money are you planning on squeezing out of them? With a devilish grin. Hernando threw an arm around Yuri's shoulders. All right. I'm in. Let's go turn that casino completely upside down tonight. As they walked, Yuri recalled the infamous names that were always whispered throughout Betrayal in his past life. There were a few figures who were always on everyone's lips. One was the kingpin of the underworld, a notoriously vicious loan shark, a man named Kolossak. Another was a titan of commerce who single-handedly built the continent's most powerful trading company. And the last was a legendary assassin who relieved the infamous underworld boss of his head, took his place, and turned the streets of Betrayal into his personal nightmare-scape. The very man who was destined to be killed by that assassin was the one standing before Yuri right now, the current, undisputed top loan shark of the underworld. Goryo purred. Well now, it's quite the honor for such a distinguished guest to visit my humble little establishment. Yuri noted coolly. So, it seems you know who I am. Goryo gave a slick smile. Of course. When the royal maze and the third prince himself come calling, it's only right for the man in charge to personally greet them. Wouldn't you agree? A smart move. Yuri acknowledged. But I didn't come here just to try my luck at the tables. Goryo gestured towards a plush lounge area. Then please, let's sit and talk. As they all got comfortable, Hernando leaned in to whisper to Yuri. Hey, you didn't say anything about times not times gambling, Goryo continued smoothly. If you're not here to gamble, then perhaps you've come to borrow some funds, bingo. Yuri replied. I plan to use the money I borrow to invest and build my own private war chest. Goryo's eyes lit up. My. Planning something even grander. Are we? Considering you're not going to a bank. But coming to me, Yuri's tone was sharp. That's enough. Asking questions isn't part of your job description. My apologies. I've overstepped, Goryo said, holding up his hands. In fact, truth be told, I'm the one who's a bit tight on cash at the moment. Goryo hesitated, then decided to push his luck. But, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly do you plan to use the funds for? Yuri stated flatly. I'm going to purchase Maranza, a spice from the Climb Mountains. The supply is about to fall far short of demand. Hernando looked completely surprised to hear that. Goryo mused. Ah. Maranza. Quite essential for crafting luxury perfumes. To be sure. But is it truly worth investing such a massive amount of capital? He questioned. He was clearly skeptical. Oh. It will be. Yuri assured him with unshakable confidence. And it's going to happen very soon. Hernando tried to recall what he'd heard about the civil war in the Klein Principality and the orcs causing trouble. But even with all that, he couldn't imagine the price of spices skyrocketing that dramatically. He figured Yuri was trying to play some kind of 4D chess, cornering the market on a super rare item before anyone else knew it existed. But one look at Yuri's smug little smirk told him this was no fool's errand. The prince was holding a royal flush and not showing his cards. So, Goryo asked Yuri to name his price. Yuri, switching hats faster than a magician, said, "Let's forget the whole Prince of Braille thing for a second. Talk to me as an investor. How much are you willing to let me walk away with?" After a bit of back and forth haggling, they finally shook on the terms, and the man slid a contract over. Yuri scribbled his name on the dotted line. And just like that, he and Hernando bounced from the joint. Hernando's jaw was still on the floor. "Did you really just take a loan from that guy?" he stammered. "That feels incredibly sketchy. Especially since you gave me zero warning and we weren't even supposed to be gambling." Yuri just shrugged. "Well, if I'd told you the real plan, you probably would have tattled and dragged me home to Dad." Hernando sighed, defeated. "Okay. Fine. Are we heading to the guild now?" "Oh, mastermind." Yuri nodded. "Yep. I've got a little errand to run." He started explaining that Magranza was basically a guaranteed gold mine. See, the only alchemist who knows the secret recipe is a top crony of Duke Clang. And he's totally going to be the first one to disappear in the upcoming civil war, until a new guy pops up. The person holding the goods can name their price. But, and this is a big but, you can't just hand a job like that to any random person. They rocked up to this seriously rickety shack, and Hernando looked like he'd seen a ghost. Yuri just casually knocked, calling out, "Era, you in there?" Hernando was practically tugging on his sleeve. "Whoa. Hold up, a job this big is what the guild is for. You lunatic." Just then, a woman emerged, introducing herself as Ara. Yuri gave a charming smile. "Yuri, third Prince of Braille. At your service. And I believe I have a proposition for you." After laying out the whole wild scheme, they headed out, and Hernando immediately whispered, "Okay. Have you officially lost your royal marbles?" Yuri just smirked. My. Hernando, you're getting awfully brave for someone talking to a prince, aren't you? Hernando shot back. Anyone with eyes would say the same thing. You're about to trust the entire Magranza deal to a run-down little shack like that. Yuri thought to himself. Sure. Right now she's just a nobody, running a trading company out of a shack. But just you wait. Soon, Ara will be the biggest name in business on the entire continent. A name everyone knows. Unlike Goryo, who preaches about trust and credit while playing every dirty trick in the book when the chips are down. Ara treats her word to a client like it's a matter of life and death. In my past, she only became a legend in the merchant world. But this time, I'm going to make her a full-blown myth. Hernando, completely lost, just asked, "So, are we done with your crazy schemes for the day?" Yuri's eyes twinkled. Just one more stop. Hernando got a very Very bad feeling about this. And where exactly are we going now? Yuri mentally ticked off his list. The loan shark of the underworld. Check. The future merchant queen. Check. Both of them were ready to play. Now. He just needed one more key player. Their next stop was a seriously rough part of town, where folks were struggling just to find their next meal. Yuri scanned the crowd. A determined look on his face. She's got to be here somewhere. And wouldn't you know it? His eyes locked onto his target. He walked right up to the woman and introduced himself. Pardon me. I'm the third prince of Betrayal. This was her. The woman he'd been searching for. The very same woman who, in his other life, had sent Goryo to meet his maker in the most brutal way possible. She was none other than the legendary assassin. Asana. She rose to her feet, her eyes sharp. What does a prince want in a place like this? Yuri just waved it off, telling her not to sweat it, explaining he'd just stumbled upon some kids who needed a hand while he was out. He then gave Hernando a look that said, "The money. Please." Hernando passed him the pouch, and Yuri couldn't help but smile at how this little kid was so full of concern. His mind drifted back to Asana's past life, recalling how she'd taken a massive loan from Goryo just to save a child, just like so many others who had come to him for help. Asana's life had spiraled into chaos, a path that ultimately forged her into a legendary assassin. Yuri's entire goal was to hit the reset button on that whole tragic chain of events. He pressed the money into Asana's hand, telling her to use it for treatment at the temple. She immediately asked what she had to do for him. Yuri simply told her, "Just one thing. You have to remember my name." And with that, he turned to walk away. Hernando hurried to catch up, asking, "Why are you throwing so much cash at beggars?" Yuri just smirked. "Think of it as an investment in our future." He was betting that these people would be vital for what was coming, pulling them into the orbit of his destiny. Now, there was just one person left. He then changed the subject. "Speaking of which, I'm curious about that founder's relic. What exactly did you see in there?" Hernando explained with a dramatic flair that he'd been thrown into a world of high-stakes gambling, literally risking his life in games at the Empire's biggest casino. Yuri thought, "Of course. That's the most fitting welcome for a guy like him." He then patted him on the back. "Try to be a little more careful next time." Yeah. The next day, Hernando was summoned by King Fior, who casually mentioned he'd heard Hernando snuck out of the capital with Yuri and demanded to know exactly what went down. Hernando spun a tale of how Yuri had lured him from the palace straight to the most notorious casino in the entire capital. The king raised a skeptical eyebrow. "Are you telling me the two of you were gambling?" Hernando confirmed with a dramatic sigh. "Oh, we gambled all right. Yuri's a real card shark. But it didn't do much good. He lost every single coin I lent him." When the king leaned in and asked what happened after they went broke, Hernando explained that Yuri then took the money he'd borrowed from Goryo and just gave it all away to some shabby, no-name little shop. And then, he added for effect, he handed a huge pile of money to some orphan he'd never even met before, right in the middle of the street. The whole time, Yuri was just watching the citizens, totally fascinated with how they lived. The king paused, then asked, "And you came straight back to the palace after that?" Hernando bowed low, confirming it. The king thought for a moment before asking, "So, Hernando, will you be attending the upcoming ball?" Hernando agreed, and the king couldn't help but tease him. "Really, I seem to remember you saying you weren't interested in such frivolous things." Hernando just gave a sly smile and replied, "People change, and for once, I feel like dancing." One day, while sparring with Bernard, Yuri ended up face down in the dirt. As he pushed himself up, he noticed two maids trying to sneak glances at Bernard. "Well, look at you, Mr. Popular," Yuri teased. That's when Hernando chimed in. "You should go to the ball. I bet a lot of people would be waiting for you there." He added, "Bernard, however, just shut the idea down completely. I'm not interested in that kind of thing," he grumbled, before critiquing Yuri's swordplay. "He's right. Your technique is all over the place. Yuri stood up, brushing himself off with a grin. Relax. It'll all come together in time. It's called freestyle, Bernard explained sternly. The mana method is a sword technique in itself. But you're nowhere near ready to master it. To properly teach you, I'd have to see you in a real fight. Despite his tough words, Bernard was secretly blown away by Yuri's progress. It was insane how fast he was picking up mana. Bernard was genuinely floored by how skilled Yuri had already become. Yuri, feeling a tad guilty about his secret advantage, shifted his stance and began to swing the wooden sword. With every move, he focused on completely hiding any trace of the Betrayal method from his past life. As he zeroed in, all his senses went into overdrive. Bernard, watching him like a hawk, urged him to pump the brakes, his concern written all over his face. Yuri couldn't help but wonder what he was on about. So, Bernard broke it down for him. Yuri was improving way too fast. While it was mind-blowing for a kid his age, his body was nowhere near ready to handle that kind of strain. Yuri just waved it off, telling Bernard not to sweat it. He promised he'd pace himself, then immediately asked for another round. Bernard gave him a look, asking if he was being serious. Yuri, with a glint in his eye, nodded and suggested they use real blades this time, insisting that he needed to level up. And fast. Bernard drew his sword with a metallic ring. Game for the challenge. That's when Yuri proposed a little wager if he landed even a single hit. Bernard would have to show his face at the ball. But Bernard shot him down flat, completely sure he was going to win, without breaking a sweat. He also cheekily pointed out that, even if they did bet, Yuri was notoriously bad at actually keeping his promises. Yuri just smirked and said, "We'll see about that," before lunging forward in a flash, hell-bent on tagging Bernard. But no matter what he tried, Yuri couldn't land a single scratch. A few days flew by, and soon, it was the night of the ball. Jorgana, the second imperial prince of the empire, arrived in a grand carriage with a lovely lady who, he noticed, couldn't seem to tear her eyes away from the window. The lady, a certain Katerina, sighed that it had been far too long, that she was thrilled about the event, and that there was someone in particular she was dying to see. Meanwhile, Anna was fussing over Yuri, putting the final touches on his outfit before asking, "So, what's the verdict?" He glanced in the mirror and grumbled that all the frills were a bit much, making him look like a mess. Anna, however, completely disagreed. She insisted it looked dashing on him and reminded him that he used to love all that fancy stuff. With one last adjustment, she declared him ready. Out of the blue, Yuri asked Anna for a dance, which clearly caught her off guard. He quickly explained he needed to practice and didn't have another partner. She hesitated for a moment, asking if they really had to. Yuri was puzzled, wondering why she was so reluctant. He then gently took her hand, assuring her, "Don't worry. I promise not to step on your feet or trip you on purpose." Seeing her expression, he quickly backtracked. "Hey, I'm being serious. Don't look at me like I'm about to pull some kind of prank." He pulled her a little closer, telling her to just follow his lead. Anna raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "Excuse me, are you underestimating my skills?" she added with a smirk. "For your information, I'm actually a fantastic dancer." Yuri's interest was piqued. "Oh really? Danced with a lot of partners before?" Anna smiled sweetly and replied, "You could say I was quite the popular girl. Though, this is my first time dancing with someone, so..." Vertically challenged. As they began to practice, Yuri yelped, "Hey, watch the foot." But despite the heads up, it happened again. Over at the ball, beautiful music swelled as couples glided across the floor. The king sipped his drink, observing the whole affair with a satisfied grin. Meanwhile, Yuri and his two brothers were posted up at a table, completely focused on demolishing the food. After a moment, Yuri spotted Count Cider in the crowd. That was odd. At the last meeting, only Rancha had bothered to show up. Yuri glanced over at his brother, still happily eating, and casually asked, "Hey, Is your eyesight getting worse? I've noticed you're wearing your glasses a lot more these days. His brother shot back with a classic, not your problem. Basically telling Yuri it was way above his pay grade, and right on cue. A siren blared, announcing Jorg's grand entrance like he was a one-man parade. He strolled into the hall, gave King Fior a firm handshake with Yuri lurking behind his dad. And Fior laid it on thick, thanking Jorg for gracing their humble little get-together. Jorg, playing along, gushed about the warm welcome before casually adding that he'd brought his little sister, Ekaterina, along for the show. Ekaterina glided forward to greet the king, while Yuri watched in silence, hit by a tidal wave of memories from a love story gone wrong. He gave himself a pep talk. Do not get tangled up with her again. You are not making that mistake twice. Ever. A couple of guys immediately tried to flirt with Katerina. And Cedric, watching from the sidelines, remarked that her signature Ice Queen routine was in full effect. He claimed it was the mark of a true royal. But the girls nearby were whispering that it just came off as super rude and unpleasant. For one heart-stopping second, Yuri actually made eye contact with Katerina. Right before she blew him off to focus on one of the other guys, Yuri felt that all too familiar sting of sadness, wondering why he was still obsessing over a relationship that was doomed from the very first hello. Anna, an absolute Angel, brought Yuri some cookies, and he thanked her for being a total rock star. She just brushed it off, saying it was a piece of cake compared to cleaning up after certain people every day. He insisted it was more than enough, then immediately asked for more cookies. As she walked away, she told him to just give a shout if he needed anything at all. Yuri thanked her, and as he stood there, Jorg himself sauntered over. Yuri's mind flashed. Oh great. It's the guy who personally led most of the Emperor's greatest hits on the battlefield. As they went through the painfully awkward motions of introducing themselves, Yuri couldn't help but think that the very man who masterminded Betrayal's downfall was now standing right in front of him. He had to remind himself to keep his cool and not look like he wanted to start a fight. Seeing as he had absolutely no game plan, Jorg cracked a smile and then pulled some kind of weird power move on Yuri. Noting that he was turning 13 this year and was without a doubt Fior's son, then he just walked off, remarking that Yuri was a remarkable talent. Yuri was pretty sure that little display was way more of a threat than a simple test. He stewed over how someone so young could already act with such infuriating, world-owning authority. His anger started bubbling up, aimed squarely at Jorg and his sister, when suddenly, poor Anna slipped, sending a plate of food splattering all over Jorg's clothes. Completely horrified, she spotted the imperial emblem on his jacket and started freaking out about how she could have been so disrespectful. She immediately launched into a frantic apology tour. Jorg just glanced at Yuri, then slowly drew his sword. He said, "It seems we've had a little accident, and by imperial law, the proper punishment for this would be execution." Yuri's anger exploded when he realized Jorg had totally set Anna up. The sheer, blatant injustice of it all made him see red. Just then, Fior stepped in, asking Jorg if he was here to ruin the party and if he was itching to see some blood. He told Jorg that if that's what he wanted, he should go do it on his own turf. Jorg, of course, shot right back. He claimed he was only there to seek an understanding with Betrayal's king and that their nations had always respected each other's authority. Fior agreed, before pointing out that it really didn't seem like Jorg had any intention of doing that at all. He then dropped a major bombshell, reminding Jorg about the incident at Gotten, where their majesties had executed not a man from Betrayal, but a knight of the Empire. Fior carefully pointed out that respecting his majesty's authority didn't mean they were his personal babysitters. Jorg shot back that it was all one and the same, and purely for the sake of peace and the honor of both their great nations. Of course, Yuri's mind helpfully replayed that charming memory of his father personally separating an imperial knight's head from his shoulders. With Jorg dredging up ancient history and waving that agreement around, it was painfully obvious the imperial family's reputation was on the line. Jorg insisted this was nothing personal, and suggested they wrap this up quickly to, keep the bloodshed to a minimum. Yuri processed the whole mess, realizing that, in other, much more terrifying words, getting in the prince's way was basically like slapping the Empire in the face. It was a classic showdown duty. Ideals. And the harsh reality that the guy with the biggest army wins. But Betrayal wasn't about to toss its honor aside. Even if it meant taking a dirt nap. That was just how they rolled. So Yuri stepped forward and declared, "Ina is my person. Her mistake is my mistake." He mentally kicked himself. All that scheming like some cornered rat had made him forget who he was. He cleared his throat and continued, "My power may be small," he stated, "but I am of royal blood. And that has to count for something." He thought about his life. Realizing it felt like one long punishment he never even signed up for, he then demanded they cancel the instant execution and proposed a trial by combat instead. Georg just started laughing. He was clearly having a great time as he turned to Fior, asking, "Is the third prince seriously making a formal objection? So, are we doing this?" he pressed. Fior looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. But finally, he caved. Georg then announced that while he would normally handle this himself, he'd bring a partner out of respect for the imperial family's dignity. And to keep things fair, Georg added, "I'll send my youngest squire from the Imperial Guard. You'd better be ready." Yuri gave a deep, respectful bow and thanked Georg for his mercy. As the man walked away, he called over his shoulder, "See you at the duel." Yuri immediately rushed to Ina's side, helping the trembling girl to her feet. "Go and get some rest," he told her gently. She hesitated, protesting that it was all her fault. But Yuri just shook his head. "Don't you dare worry about me," he insisted. Two other maids came and led Ina away. As Yuri went to get something to eat, he spotted Katerina. He immediately shut that thought down and walked right past her. From a distance, Hernando watched the whole drama play out. Later that night, as Yuri walked down a corridor, his brother suddenly blocked his path and asked, "What in the world were you thinking?" Yuri nearly jumped out of his skin. He hadn't even heard him approach. "I couldn't just stand there and let them kill Ina," he replied. His brother nodded. "Well, you're certainly committed now." He then placed a hand on Yuri's head. A rare moment of comfort that sent a wave of nostalgia through him. It had been far too long since that last happened. His brother then asked, "You think you might need my help with this?" As for the trial, Yuri knew Georg's offer of kindness was a total sham. When fighters are evenly matched, an accident can easily be fatal. "I know what you're worried about," Yuri told his brother. "Don't worry. I'll handle it. This will be over fast," his brother reassured him. But Yuri was determined to see it through himself, dug in his heels, insisting, "I made this mess, so I'm the one who's going to clean it up." He knew his brother could snap his fingers and make it all go away. But no. Yuri was dead set on handling it himself. His brother just sighed, placed a trusting hand on his shoulder, and brought up the ball. That was a whole other can of worms. But he promised Yuri he'd take care of it. He basically told Yuri to go get some sleep. Yuri actually agreed, thanking his big bro for having his back. He couldn't help but think that if the Empire hadn't wrecked Brill, his brother would have been the one on the throne. He wondered what kind of amazing country it would have been with his brother in charge. Yuri swore to himself he would fight to make that future a reality. And he didn't care who he had to go through. And just like that, it was showtime. Yuri stood, facing his opponent. The entire crowd held its breath as the drama unfolded. Hernando casually remarked on Yuri's pop-up challenge, turning to Sane and asking for his hot take. Sane, ever, the analyst, who noted the opponent's stance was rock solid, and for a squire, his sword skills were seriously impressive. He even muttered that the kid was a perfect fit for the Empire's guard. Then he blurted out, "You think Yuri's gonna be okay?" Hernando just flashed a knowing grin. "Dude, just look at him," he told Sane. Yuri looked totally chill, stretching like he was getting ready for a light jog. Hernando reassured him there was zero reason to worry. After all, being a Grand Wizard isn't a title. The Magic Tower just hands out like party favors. It's a rank that almost no one ever reaches. That title is reserved only for those who've mastered the legendary Dokman motto, a power level that's basically off the charts for normal people. DMA is the little trick that lets you get a sneak peek at the world's fate. To read the mandate of heaven, using a very specific formula. It was a power gifted by the world itself, a club with a current membership of exactly one Hernando. This whole situation gave Hernando a major case of déjà vu. Taking him back to that time he played cards with Yuri. They were just shooting the breeze. But Hernando, for all his cosmic power, couldn't for the life of him figure out how he was losing every single hand. Let's be real. Hernando was absolutely terrible at the game. But in his mind, after achieving Dokumamoto, he decided to take a card game seriously for the first time. Which was the exact moment his wallet started weeping. He refused to chalk it up to a coincidence. This is a guy who could usually read his opponent's cards, their luck, and probably their star sign with just a glance. But when he looked at that kid, Yuri, he got nothing. It was like staring into a perfectly polished black mirror. And then it hit him that was the face from his vision of Jiaman, the one with the black hair and eyes rocking the crest of the Betrayal royal family. Those impossibly arrogant eyes definitely belonged to Yuri. In his vision, even while bleeding all over the place, Yuri never once gave up. Still swinging that sword of his. The vision finally cut out, with Yuri collapsing in utter despair. He was pretty sure the chain of events that led to that future had started a long time ago. A little anecdote he'd previously dismissed as a weird fluke was now morphing into a genuine 5 alarm suspicion. So, thanks to the prince's bonkers behavior on their last outing, Hernando decided it was time to break out the big guns, the mandate of heaven observation formula. The cosmic whiplash that followed left him wondering when, or if, he'd ever be able to use that power again. But it was then he discovered the unbelievable truth: Yuri had no fate. Back at the duel, Yuri let out a sigh, announcing he was ready when his opponent was, and politely asked how long he planned to keep swinging at the air. Watching the whole thing unfold, couldn't help but wonder if Yuri was really sure he didn't need to, warm up first. But Yuri just shot back with total confidence, declaring that he was starting right now. His opponent just shrugged and agreed. So Fior dramatically called for the trial to begin. Yuri, of course, was the first to charge in. And in a flash, the two were a whirlwind of clashing steel. Fior then turned to make some small talk with Hernando, who just nodded along, leaning in like a gossip. Fior asked Hernando, "So, who's your money on? What's the final score going to be?" Hernando's eyes were glued to Yuri, effortlessly deflecting his opponent's attacks as he replied, "Honestly, I haven't got a clue." Intrigued, Fior pressed on. "Did you come to Bell, chasing some divine prophecy, and is it over? Are you planning on leaving us?" Hernando quickly shot that down, and Fior let out a huge sigh of relief. Glad his favorite magician wasn't bailing on them. Hernando chuckled. "I'm genuinely grateful. You all think so highly of a humble little magic user like myself." Fangor chimed in. "Hey, none of that. Being overly humble is just asking for trouble. Seriously, don't sweat it." Hernando then turned to the king. "Your Majesty, in your expert opinion, who's got the edge?" Fur glanced at Yuri's opponent and said flatly, "Yuri's the underdog here." Hernando nodded, seeing the king's logic perfectly. "Yeah, that's what I was thinking, too." He journeyed to Betrayal on a quest, following what he thought was a sign from the heavens about the most powerful person on the continent. The one who could literally pull the strings of the world's fate was supposed to be right here, but since the legendary sword was still tucked away in its scabbard, Hernando was starting to feel like there was no point in sticking around anymore. He even muttered that he figured it was time to pack his bags. Right at that moment, Yuri's opponent launched a desperate all-out attack. Yuri just watched the move and smirked. "Not so fast. The party's not over yet." With a flick of his wrist, he summoned a brilliant sword of pure mana, thinking to himself, "All right, I guess playtime's over. I've seen enough of his moves." Yuri's speed exploded, and he closed the distance in a blink, attacking his opponent with blinding swiftness, stopping his blade just a fraction of an inch from his neck. The poor kid's eyes went wide, absolutely certain his life was over. Everyone watching gasped, completely shocked by the insane plot twist, as Yuri simply rested his sword on the man's shoulder instead. With a dazzling smile, Yuri cheerfully announced, And I believe that's my win. The crowd erupted in cheers for him. But Hernando was lost in thought. I followed destiny all this way, just to meet the one man who laughs in its face. From the very tip of Yuri's sword, the will of heaven that had guided him here was being completely rewritten. Even stoic Yor was applauding Yuri. Hernando's mind was reeling with the idea that what should have been death had been twisted back into life. Every single thing Yuri did was a direct defiance of the fate the heavens had decreed. It was clear that Yuri was a being who existed completely outside the world's destiny. He was a wild card, someone who could transcend fate itself. Hernando couldn't suppress a shiver of pure awe. Giddy with anticipation to see how Yuri was going to continue to flip the world's destiny on its head from this day forward, Hernando was so thrilled he felt like he could burst. 5 years later, a young maid scurried down a corridor, thinking, okay, so far, so good. Then, panicking, wait, how in the world did I end up in the wrong patrol zone? Oh man, if I get caught, I'm toast. As if on cue, a boy appeared before her, asking, "Are you new? What are you doing here?" Her blood ran cold when she realized he had to be from the Betrayal family. Okay, stay calm, she told herself. Just do what my senior taught me. The boy repeated, "What are you doing in this area?" His expression was so incredibly serious. Not even a hint of a smile. Her mind raced, trying to identify him based on the palace gossip. Okay, if his expression is always that serious, he's got to be the king. If he smiles gently all the time, he's the crown prince. And if he walks around with that certain kind of swagger, he's probably the third prince. But before her internal monologue could finish, he snapped angrily. Are you mocking me? The maid's brain did a frantic reboot. Wait, was that times the times third prince? Okay. New mission, walk on eggshells. He then casually asked if there was some kind of royal who's who guide. Mentioning they needed to dodge a certain someone like the plague, he leaned in, adding, now, I'm going to have to teach you a little lesson. Right on cue, Yuri appeared, asking, what seems to be the problem here? The maid thought, okay, that confident swagger and the hand always resting on his sword. That's got to be the third prince. No doubt about it. Yuri, noticing her totally bewildered expression, arched an eyebrow. Are you giving her a hard time? A little later, Yuri was strolling down the corridor, happily munching on some cookies. He grinned to himself, thinking, that maid totally knows the way to my heart. As he walked, his thoughts drifted to So Sukong, and even with a sword in his hand, he instinctively used his mana to ease the pressure of his grip. He smirked, realizing he'd at least mastered that much. It had been 5 long years since Lauren's sword had sent him on a one-way trip to his past life and back again. Looking out the window, he muttered, well, the peaceful days were fun while they lasted. Things are about to get rowdy. Yuri then knocked on a heavy door. Hello, is this thing on? He called out, but was met with complete silence. A guard nearby whispered, Sir, they're in a super important meeting, and suggested he knock louder. Yuri, never one for subtlety, just reared back and punched the door open. He sauntered into the now silent room, announcing, Hey. I knocked, but nobody answered. I guess I might have knocked a little too hard, he added with a shrug. The guard just sighed. Sir, that wasn't knocking. Yuri then told his father, I'll be joining this little powwow, plopped into a seat, and gestured casually. Please, continue. One of the lords was whining. Our territory simply doesn't have any spare troops to send to the Alliance army. He then added, and how can we be sure the Empire will even appreciate this? Can't the other territories just cough up more soldiers? The younger noble shot back. That is the most irresponsible thing I have ever heard you say. As they bickered, Yuri rolled his eyes. Everyone was just crunching the numbers, calculating their potential gains and losses. It was a scene straight out of his previous life. The Empire requests troops from all over to form an orc-slaying squad out east. But Surprise. That alliance was a total failure. And the seriously ticked-off orcs came back with a vengeance. They smashed against the borders of every nation that helped out. Except for the empires. Of course. That's when Yuri knew it was all a giant scheme. They lost so many great knights because of that trick. Including Lean. And he'd be damned if he let history repeat itself. A man was still arguing. We won't send a single soldier. To which another snapped. And you think the rest of us are overflowing with knights? Yuri slammed his fist on the table. Fine, I'll join the Alliance army myself. Now how about the rest of you, show some actual sincerity for once. Stop making the same stupid mistakes and start acting like the nobles you're supposed to be. He demanded. Across the room, Fur couldn't help but smirk. He knew exactly what Yuri was planning. Later, while Yuri was practicing with a short sword, the young noble approached him. Are you really going to join the Alliance army? He asked. Still looking puzzled. There's no reason for royalty to go into that mess. Yuri just smiled faintly, giving his standard line. It's the duty of the royal family. The boy's face lit up with understanding. I see your resolve now. Please, come back safely. I promise to protect the palace while you're away. Once the kid was gone, Bernard remarked. Well, wasn't that a touching brotherly moment? Yuri shot back. So, you're not the least bit worried about me. Bernard looked genuinely confused. Why would I be? As long as you don't do something outrageously reckless? I'm pretty sure you'll come back in one piece. Wow. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Yuri deadpanned. Bernard insisted. Just be careful. Okay, I'm telling you. Orcs are a handful way stronger and sneakier than people give them credit for. And you really need to watch out for the ones flying Carrie's banner. The Orpal. As far as orcs go, they're the absolute worst of the worst. Yuri just waved it off. Don't sweat it. I've got a plan. Just then, Anna came rushing in. Sir, a guest has arrived. They brought the item you ordered. Yuri gave Bernard a sly look. See, a very special plan. Yuri met a man who formally introduced himself as the vice president of the Era Trading Company. Yuri cut him short. Is Era around? The man explained that she was currently out on business. Which is why he was sent in her place, Yuri mused. Still running around, getting her own hands dirty. Huh, tell her to take it easy for me. Will you? She insists she was born for field work. The man sighed. Yuri raised an eyebrow. So, is that all you came for? The man quickly shook his head. I've brought the item you requested, he said. Fantastic. Yuri thought. The four-wheeled blade is finally in my grasp. The man squinted. Is this thing really that valuable? To be honest, it just looks like a fancy dagger. Oh, it's valuable. Yuri smirked. It's a relic humming with ancient magic. With a flick of his wrist, he made the blade float in midair. It zipped towards the man, who flinched. As it hovered an inch from his nose, Yuri added casually, Don't worry. It won't kill you. Are you moving that with your mana? The man stammered. I had no idea you were so powerful. Yuri just grinned. I guess you just figured I'd goof off all day. Huh. The man didn't answer. Instead asking again. Seriously. What is that thing? Nothing you need to lose sleep over. Yuri replied. Just give my regards to Ara. And next time you visit, bring me a full report on the Imperial branch's progress. The man nodded. Of course. And practically fled the room. As Yuri finally relaxed, he sensed another presence in the room. All right. Asana. You can come out. How did it go with Goro? He asked. She replied. He received your warning. I left a little something on the pillow next to his head while he slept. Perfect. Yuri said. I figured that creep was looking for a way to get his grubby hands on Ara's money. Asana then asked, Are you really joining the Allied forces? When he confirmed, she told him. Then be careful. Yuri smirked. You say that like you're actually concerned. What's that supposed to mean? She retorted. Yuri's grin widened. It means you're coming with me. That is, if you think you can keep up. Her eyes lit up. Anywhere is better than the place I came from. Yuri nodded. Then get ready. And with that, she melted back into the shadows. A few days later, the day of the deployment had arrived. As Yuri was getting into his armor, his brother begged him, "Please come back safe." Yuri knelt and smiled. "Don't you worry. I'm invincible. And I'm going to make the name Betrayal shine again. And you," he added. "Promise me you'll take a break from studying now and then, and look after yourself." The boy nodded and hugged Yuri tightly. "You take care of yourself." Yuri promised. "I will always come back to you." Fior stood waiting on the stage. As Yuri approached, Fior asked. Feeling nervous, Yuri scoffed. "Not a chance." Fior grinned. "Good. Now turn around." And just like that, every single soldier standing in front of Yuri was suddenly his responsibility. Yuri's inner monologue was running wild, thinking not everyone would make it back for dinner. But he'd be darned if he let them go out in some lame, meaningless way. He definitely wasn't about to let the past get a second season. His dad asked if he was ready for all this heavy baggage. And Yuri just nodded, trying to look the part. His father's advice was to just take it one step at a time. Then, Yuri felt a sudden, intense vibe shift, the kind that screamed, "Someone wants to turn you into a shish kebab." His body hit the emergency brake. A purely instinctive nope as he saw a figure casually strolling towards him. Yuri wondered what fresh heck this was, quickly realizing that running would equal an instant game over. And this was an invitation he couldn't exactly decline. Then, a surge of what felt like main character energy zapped through him. And poof, the Mala sword was in his hand, striking in a flash. A perfect copy of his dad's signature move. His father casually remarked that Yuri handled that pretty well, trying to look cool. Yuri pulled his sword back. He thought to himself, "Yep, just as terrifying as I remember." His dad then said there was no need for a big speech, just a simple request for Yuri to come back in one piece. Taking a deep breath, Yuri turned to the soldiers, announcing he was the third Prince of Betrayal and asking them all to just trust him so they could get this show on the road. To his surprise, they all roared with approval. The scene then dramatically cut to a prison, featuring a very unhappy orc in a cell. Seeger was standing there, giving his best intense stare at the prisoner, who was probably not enjoying the attention.